Blessings, everybody. I hope you're doing well wherever you may find yourselves. I am Dane, host of the channel. Today's video is called, Are There No More Legendary Bands? This is a follow-up video to my most recent video, which was entitled, What's Wrong with Music These Days? ? So if you've not seen that video, please stop what you're doing now. Stop watching this video, turn it off, and go look at that video because there's a chronology here. This is a part 2, so please do that for me. If you've seen that video, please continue watching. I'd very much appreciate that. So now, again, I'm going to be tackling the concept, are there no legendary bands currently? Now, keep in mind, nothing I say here is gospel. This is one person's opinion and one person's only, so please don't get bent out of shape and be ugly in the comments. Again, it's just my opinion. No one is saying, I'm certainly not saying that you have to agree with me. So if you're going to disagree, great, but please don't get ugly. If you're going to agree, great, but don't get cocky or arrogant either. Okay, it goes both ways. But before we get started, I do have to do two things. I have to talk about, one, what is the definition of legendary? But before I do that, I want to give, I'd like to talk about this flawed logic that I see all the time, how people say that a person always sees their generation of music as the best, and I'm going to push back on that right now. So I hear this every once in a while, or often rather, and the most recent time was, again, these videos are partly a response to Rick Beato and a couple other videos, their videos talking about the state of music today and that kind of thing. And someone posted that every generation always sees their generation's music as the best. Well, that's a generalization. That's a huge generalization. We're brought up in school always, at least I was, I hope they're still teaching us that generalizations are, especially in writing and in speaking, generalizations are always the wrong way to go because you're speaking for others and that sort of thing. Not everyone, in this case, believes that their generation's music is best. So someone said this in one of Rick Beato's recent videos, and so I commented back, I pushed back, and here's what I said. I've been saying for years how flawed the argument is about how each generation only values its own era of music. This is false. I'm 56 years old, and I love rock music from the late 50s, most of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and much from 2000 onward. I listen to Motown, jazz, jazz fusion, jazz funk, in addition to rock music, of course, and I also adore classical artists, especially Beethoven, Bach, Mozart, Shostakovich, among others. And I'm always looking for new stuff and try to find new stuff. Like you said, new can be anything you discover for the first time. So while 70s hard rock may be my favorite, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Judas Priest, Motorhead, that kind of thing, it's not the only thing I listen to. I do appreciate and hold with great esteem stuff from the past before I was born and listen to it as part of my personality, if you will. So 50s rock, I love classical music. Now, do I know everything about classical music? No, but there's a lot I know about classical music, but I'm always exploring classical music and Baroque because it's such a big, there's just so much there. So while I know a lot about Beethoven, there are some things from Beethoven I've yet to explore. Same thing with Mozart, Shostakovich, etc. And there's some stuff out there that I've not explored at all that I want to. So if we talk about jazz, I've not gone through all of Keith Jarrett's discography yet. I hope to one day. With respect to Herbie Hancock, talking about jazz again, I know most of his stuff from Headhunter onwards, but his earlier stuff before that, I have yet to listen to any of that, and I hope to do that as well. So constantly looking at stuff I am from eras before I was born, and who's to say one day that stuff that I haven't explored will replace the stuff that I consider my favorite currently right now. All right, so again, that's flawed logic. Now let's talk about the definition of legendary. Now, to be a legendary artist or a band, you have to contain unique intangibles. I hate that word intangibles because sports pundits use it all the time. So a better thing to say would be, we'll talk about what are those intangibles. Well, a band or artist who forever changes music, or another way to say that is that they break new ground. Another way to say that is that they're innovative or they break new boundaries. Another element would be that they have meaningful lyrics, often poetic or approaching poetic, right? Another element would be, and this is a huge one, that they have that balance between what the fans' expectations of the music is going to be, and balanced with that they're not playing to the gallery. So David Bowie talks about that in one of his interviews, how you always want to be evolving or experimenting, but you need that balance between the two, because if you're always experimenting, then you may get too far removed from your signature sound. So again, it's about balance between fans' expectations and experimenting. So for example, an example of where a band goes too far and becomes too far removed from their signature sound would be Rush's Hold Your Fire. To me, that's just pretty much a horrible album. Okay, so another example of what it means to be legendary band or artist is that you have superb chemistry, you have superb synergy. Rush goes as an example, Led Zeppelin, right, that kind of thing. There's not all this infighting and that kind of thing, because that could destroy chemistry and synergy. Artistic integrity is the next one. This one I'm not so sure, but I have in parentheses, perhaps you're a great live band. The next one is definite. You have to possess soul, you have to possess heart, you have to possess spirit. And another one is that your music has to stand the test of time. It's not a novelty. The shine or the gloss is not worn off, kind of thing. Now here's one for me personally, and there are exceptions, but before I get to the exceptions, I think that at minimum you have to have 5 or more very good to legendary albums in your discography. You have to have a really good album run, in other words. Think of the Rolling Stones from Beggar's Banquet through and including, say, Tattoo You, or at least Some Girls, right? That's what I mean. Some days I think you have to have 7 or more very good to legendary albums in said discography. Now, there may be exceptions to that rule. For example, Jimi Hendrix comes to mind, and the Stooges, because they only have 3 studio albums. We're not talking about things that came in posthumously, but there may be exceptions, and that's because of the impact and influence that these short discographies made on other musicians and fans alike, right? And critics, okay? So now, it's important to understand that this notion of where did I get the idea of doing this video? Or, one of them, in addition to Rick Beato, is a YouTuber. There's a YouTube channel called The Steve Champagne Show, and in these videos, Steve Champagne talks about music. And in one of his videos, which I can't remember the name of it, he shows a clip of Dan Rather interviewing Gene Simmons. And Gene Simmons says that there are no legendary bands since 1988. And I thought to myself, 1988 makes me think of And Justice for All. So what Gene Simmons is essentially saying is that since 1989, there have been no legendary bands. Dan Rather's reply, what about Nirvana? Gene Simmons says, I'll give you that one, or something to that effect. So that amends his thesis. So since Nirvana's debut album came out in 1989, Gene Simmons is now saying there have been no legendary bands since 1990. Now, before we continue, we need to talk about how the word legendary is overused. And so let me go to a source I have here on my phone. Excuse me, this is Prince.com, which is like a Quora or Reddit. And MJS Carousel says, it's downright ridiculous that these prestigious titles, iconic and legendary, are carelessly given to any singer or artist nowadays when they are not deserving. There should be some objective standard criterion that is used to determine who becomes these titles, regardless of subjective opinions, because every popular singer is not an icon or legend. Well, I'm going to push back a little bit. Whenever someone uses the word objective to describe taste or preference in music, I cringe. On the inside, I would say you can have a criterion that's subjective. It's very simple. For a band or artist to be considered legendary, would mean that there has to be a large consensus of people to argue that said bands and artists are legendary. And the argument, the consensus is still subjective. It's not objective. So anyway, so I agree that the word legendary is overused, but we'll get to that. So now, keep in mind that there are bands and artists who are considered, from a large consensus, they're considered legendary. And I'll concede many of the... what I'm trying to say, is that there are some bands and artists out there that are considered, by way of consensus, to be considered legendary. And I will concede that they are legendary, even though I may not like them at all or like them much. So for example, I'm not a big Bob Dylan fan, but I will concede that he is a legendary artist. I'm not a big Bruce Springsteen fan, but I will concede that he too is a legendary artist. Now, this works both ways. There are some bands that are considered legendary that I don't think are. So the opposite holds true. Now, so Dan Rather mentioned Nirvana. They could be in the same context with the Stooges and Hendrix, because Nirvana having only 3 albums. I'm not sure if I want to consider Nirvana as legendary. If I had to choose definitively with the metaphorical sword over my head, I would argue I would concede that Nirvana is a legendary band because of the consensus. But for me personally, I think they're overrated. I think I don't think that Kurt Cobain is a genius, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. If you want to see something regarding that, go look at Mike the Music Snob's video where he talks about that subject matter. So if we stick to grunge for a minute, I would argue that the big 4 of grunge, even though there may be consensus that they're legendary, I don't think they are. Pearl Jam, I don't consider a legendary band. They have a huge discography, but for me, that first album is the only legendary album they have. Alice in Chains, I think, comes close. That debut is amazing. The second album, I only like 4 songs on it. I love the 2 EPs and Sap and Jar of Flies. Those, I think, are masterpieces. The album with the 3-legged dog, which I think is just called Alice in Chains, I like 3 songs and only 3 songs. It's very drony and uninspiring. I do love Black Gives Way to Blue. I think that's a phenomenal record, even though Lane Staley isn't on it. And then everything after that, their last record, I don't like at all, but the God Put Dinosaurs Here is okay. So for me personally, I don't consider Alice in Chains a legendary band. Soundgarden either. I think they pulled a cult. Look at my recent video. I talked about what I meant by that. They had their signature sound. They moved away from it with Bad Motorfinger. I like Bad Motorfinger, but they went more heavier and not that avant-garde style rock heaviness that they had in Louder Than Love. And if we're speaking about Louder Than Love, for me personally, that album was a novelty album. I liked it for a while, and then I don't even like it anymore for whatever reason. Now, their masterpiece for me is it's a twofer. It's one album now. It's the FOP EP / Screaming Life. I love that. It's heavy. It's great. So again, everything I'm saying here is just one person's opinion. These 4 bands don't have enough weight to their discography, and you could argue, well, their influence is so profound. Okay, I'll concede that maybe. I'm not sure I'm on the fence with these 4 bands, I guess is what I'm saying. So they may fit into the Jimi Hendrix Stooges category. So again, one more time, I think that just because there's a consensus that this artist or band is legendary doesn't mean you have to agree with that. And vice versa. I think that you can argue that, okay, I don't like this artist or band, but I'll concede that they're legendary because of that consensus. So again, there's no objective criteria. It's all subjective. It's all about your personal preference. So let me talk about now the overuse of the word legendary and iconic. We'll just stick to legendary. And with these 2 bands, I mean, no disrespect. It's just a coincidence that a member in each of these two bands have passed on and they're no longer with us. But there's a YouTuber who calls him, well, his channel's called the Real Music Observer, and I don't subscribe to his channel, but I do occasionally watch his videos because he's good at providing breaking news with respect to what's going on musically in the music world. I'm sorry. And a video he put out a while back was when the lead singer of Firehouse died, and he referred to the lead singer of Firehouse as a legendary artist. And I thought to myself, well, if we look at their discography, it's only their first album that went gold, and then you're putting his voice, his vocal talent up there with the likes of Robert Plant, Steve Perry, Elton John, Tommy Shaw, David Coverdale, etc., etc. I don't see that at all. I don't see how he's in the Hall of Fame or the Justice League of America or Pantheon with those. I'm sorry, they're a whole leaps and bounds ahead. He has a cool hair metal voice, but I'm sorry, I don't consider him legendary. Same thing with Collective Soul. Rick Beato did a video, I think, where he interviewed the guitar player, and someone posted in the comments that the first 5 albums, the guitar playing on the first 5 albums is legendary. So I posted in the comment as a reaction to that comment, seriously, question mark, as being polite as possible. So you're saying you're putting him in the same league as Jimmy Page, Ritchie Blackmore, Jeff Beck, Jimi Hendrix, etc. And I posted 6, 7, maybe 10. Eddie Van Halen was one of them. Michael Schenker was one of them. So, and he never responded. So I don't see the guitar player of Collective Soul as in the same league as these gentlemen. I don't get how anyone would see that. But again, it's just my opinion. I respect their opinion, but at the same time, never mocking and making fun. That's wrong. But at the same, I respect their opinion, but I don't get their opinion, if that makes sense. So. Anyway, so now let's talk about, these are 2 sources also. If we talk about, here's a let me go back to this one. So here is the website is called Alabama Life and Culture, and the article is called Rock Isn't Dead, 15 Rising Rock Bands and Solo Acts You Should Know. And they're rising, so there's no reason to call them legendary because, well, you can argue that Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Rod Stewart, Humble Pie, etc., Heart, whatever, throw in there, Hendrix, they were legends in their own time. And who knows what the future holds for these bands, but I don't consider them legendary now. Let's take a look at these bands. Crown Lands, I like them. Band Incorporated from Boston, I like them. Bourbon House, bluesy rock kind of thing, they're okay. The LA Maybe, have an AC/DC type edge, I like them. Naked Gypsy Queens, I do not like. I think they're imitation classic rock, trying to ride the wave of early Black Crowes kind of thing, but they're not making it their own. Same thing with, they're not listed here, but Dirty Honey is even more like the Black Crowes, and they're riding that same wave, and they're too derivative, if you ask me. Plush, I do like Plush. Native Sons, I'm not a fan of Native Sons. They've been hailed as the reincarnation of Bad Company. I don't get it, but people like them. Arian Jones, not familiar with him or her. River Ghost from Nashville, that swampy swamp rock, they're okay. 53 Judges, not a fan. Too derivative of Velvet Revolver, if you ask me. Thunder Mother is a band I like. They're from Sweden, and they have some really cool Motorhead meets kind of a thrashy element to it. The Cold Stairs, they're okay band. I like them. And that last one listed here, the Black Moods, heavy metal band. They're described here as power pop, but they're more heavy to me than that. Anyway, so I like them, but none of these I would consider legendary. It's too early, but I don't see them either as being, if their sound continues in the way that they sound so far as being in the Hall of Fame with, the Pantheon of Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, etc. Now, if we talk about another article called "The 30 Best Bands of the Past 30 Years," some of these are rap and hip hop, so I'll skip those, so you won't hear me rattle off 30 bands. But let's talk about the rock ones. Bikini Kill, I don't see them as legendary. That's R&B. Animal Collective. What's great about this article is that it talks about what their essential recordings are and then why they're not number one. Baroness, I like some of Baroness's stuff. The National doesn't do anything for me. Portishead, don't get them at all. I don't see them as legendary. I see them as a flash in the pan. Next one is Blur, same thing. The Pixies, I love the Pixies' earlier stuff, but I don't see them as a legendary band. They might be a reason why you don't consider Nirvana to be a legendary band, because Nirvana is too derivative of the Pixies. Fugazi, I don't see them as legendary. Unwound is a band I really like, a great avant-garde band. Don't see them as legendary, though, but they're very good. Oops. Go back. All right. Neuroses, I like Neuroses. Do I like everything by them? No, but they are a cool band. I don't see them as legendary, though. Flaming Lips, I never understood. But again, just my opinion. I don't like the Flaming Lips. Godspeed You Black Emperor, I like some of their stuff. Really cool band. Very avant-garde. Okay, that's a rap group. That's electronica. Outcast, no, that's rap. Yola Tango, I do like Yola Tango. I don't think they're a great band, but I think they're a good band. Pavement, never understood them. Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, not my cup of tea, really. I like a few songs here and there. Converge, not my cup of tea. All right. Let's see. Nine Inch Nails, now we're talking. Debut 1989. We'll come back to them. My Bloody Valentine, they were a novelty band for me. I don't listen to them anymore. Wilco, never understood Wilco. That's rap, Beastie Boys. REM, they're before 1988 when their first debut came out, so they would fit Dan Rather's argument and Gene Simmons' argument. Sonic Youth, I never understood them. Just too... they're avant-garde, but just because something's avant-garde doesn't mean it's good. There's a few songs I like. I just never understood that the tuning of the guitar to me isn't my cup of tea, and the vocals not my cup of tea either. Public Enemy is rap. Nirvana's listed here, of course. Sleater Kinney, really. Radiohead, post their first debut is after 1988. So some of you will argue that they would fall into the monkey wrench of Dan Rather / Gene Simmons argument. I don't consider Radiohead a legendary band. I only like the bands OK Computer and Kid A, and that's pretty much it. I like a couple songs on Rainbow, and that's it. But again, this is all subjective. So now, those just under 40 bands that I rattled off from those two articles, I would argue that Nine Inch Nails could fit the legendary band status role, but I'm going to talk more about that later. I'm still not sure whether or not to consider them a legendary band. That's so. If we buy into, again, I'm going to tell you what I think, or do I think there are legendary bands currently, 1988 or 1989. Excuse me. Let me go back. So Gene Simmons says no. Well, once Gene Simmons concedes to Dan Rather, the two of them agree, if you count Nirvana, there have been no legendary bands since 1989, since Nirvana's debut came out in 1989. All right. I again will put my input on that towards the end of the video. But if we buy into the argument that there are no legendary bands since 1988 or 1989, why not? Well, let's talk about the first reason why this may be possible. Because of Eddie, I know everyone in these bands and I'm friends with them drunk. He's part of the problem. When you have someone who's in the limelight, a critic of his stature, make of that what you will, what he may be doing is a disservice to people because they may be over-influenced by him and follow and take everything he says to heart, because what Eddie does is that he focuses on the past too much, and he doesn't look forward much to the present or the future for music. And if you don't look forward to the future or the current or the present, then you have a limited taste. He does focus on the same 50 or so bands over and over and again, and that's it. And that's it. Every once in a while I see him talk about a new band, like I remember him mentioning Naked Gypsy Queens, but it's rare for him to do that. So again, I think people like him, when they have a limited taste, they do a disservice for those of us looking for new music. And when you don't have someone promoting new bands, how can you have new legendary bands when they're not being promoted? More of that in a minute. Now we have the opposite side of the spectrum as to why there are no new legendary bands, and that belongs to that's because of the process. Potentially why there are no legendary bands, is because the opposite side of the spectrum are YouTubers or people like YouTubers who focus too much on the here today, gone tomorrow type band, the novelty bands, the novelty artists, the flavor of the month type, or the flavor of the week type, or flavor of the year type bands, and then they're gone, right? There are people who promote these daily or weekly on their YouTube channels, and there are a lot of them. And it ties into the Rick Beato argument, where because we're oversaturated every week or every day with new CDs to try, then we're just consuming. We're just like a person on a dating app, swiping and never settling down on someone, right? Or a person who's on the internet, but they're not reading an article. They're just or on YouTube, people who I forget the psychologist who said there's a problem with this addiction to cell phones because they're like a dog in the backyard. They're looking for something to read, right? But they don't find anything that they like. And so that's the metaphor for the dog who's digging up the backyard but never finding a bone, but keeps digging up new holes. So that's that constant swiping, that constantly consuming new stuff. But if you're moving on to the next thing very quickly, then you're not spending quality time with said music because you're too interested in, you're only half or less than half invested into what's in front of you on your headphones or what you're listening to out your speakers. So that's the problem. So you're not spending quality time with what you have. You move on too fast to the next thing instead of that true experience that me and Rick Beato and other people talk about, where back in the old days you got on the bus, you purchased your music, and you settled down and you had a limited number of albums, and that gave you that quality time with each and every one of them. Now, you can still do that. You may have thousands of albums, but you spend quality time. But most people don't do that. They don't spend quality because they're moving on too fast to the next thing because of oversaturation, right? So these are the two possible extremes that cause that problem. And that leads to the age old, of not promoting things, not promoting them sincerely, not promoting them at all, not promoting them wholeheartedly. Because you don't have, like I said in my previous video, you don't have the DJ anymore in the role that it used to play. You don't have the record label in the role that it used to play because of streaming, because of the masses just wanting to chase after a hit song, or bands chasing after a hit song instead of a full-fledged start-to-finish or mostly good start-to-finish good album. Or it was meant to be a start-to-finish good album. That kind of thing. Now, to quote the band Queensryche, is there anybody listening? Part of the problem why we may not have any legendary bands connected to the constant swiping and wanting new things without settling down and really focusing on something, kind of tied to that. And Rick Beato talked about this, as have I in the past. Okay? All genres are down with respect to popularity. Country, rock, hip-hop, R&B. Okay? Even video games are down because people are not doing anymore. They're watching other people doing. And I talked about it in my previous video. I'm not going to beat that dead horse anymore. But tied to all of this, people aren't truly listening because it's background music for them now while they're studying. Excuse me. And as I tell my students as a teacher, you're not really studying. And I give this example all the time. I remember going into one of my favorite cafes back in the day, and I'm preparing for something new that I'm teaching. And these group of girls come in, and there's like 4 of them. They get a booth. So all 4 of them in the booth, and they have their laptops up. And they have their books out, and they have their notes out, and they have their cell phones out. And I see that they're reading a Faulkner book, the most difficult one. Not in my time of dying, as I lay dying, excuse me. It's The Sound and the Fury, his most difficult work. That first quarter that's divided into 4 sections, the first part is really difficult to read. And they're on. So I'm getting my coffee, and I noticed that they're reading the book, and I had read it a couple times, and I have never taught it. So I asked them, because I was curious. I said, "Young ladies, hi, I'm Mr. So-and-so. I'm a teacher. How are you liking the book?" And they said that they liked it, but it was difficult. And I said, "Well, what's your teacher talking about thematically?" So I had a short conversation with the 4 young ladies, and they were very sweet and very nice. And I'm in my 30s at the time. So then I go and I said, "Well, I won't keep you. Good luck in your quiz or whatever." And I go back and sit down. And then my girlfriend comes in at the time, and we get to talking and that sort of thing. And then she leaves. My girlfriend leaves, and I get to see that the whole time, because I'm looking at them in the corner of my eye, because I want to see if they're really studying, and they're not, because they're looking at their cell phones or their laptops, and they're not looking at their notes. And I can see 2 of them, because their backs are turned. 2 of them have their backs, but I can see that 2 of them, what's on their laptop, because I'm sitting right close to them with my girlfriend at the time, and what's on their laptop is not like PowerPoint stuff or slide stuff for their notes. It's social media stuff. So this is part of the problem. People aren't really studying because they're listening to music, or it's background, and it's going to throw them off. You're not really studying if you have, going off on a tangent here, but you get my point, right? And the vice versa is true. If you're studying but you got music on, you're not really studying. If you got music on while you're cooking or doing something else like studying, you're not really listening to music. So that's the problem. You're only half-heartedly into it. You're not giving it your all. That's part of the problem. So you may cook, you may clean while you're listening to music. This is not a true listening experience. You're not taking it all in. Multitasking to me is a myth. Okay? So another reason why legendary bands and artists may not exist right now is because of the cookie cutter thing that we have going on, that imitation, that unoriginal, that Naked Gypsy Queen sound, that Dirty Honey sound, right? Which I've spoken about before. Okay, you're too derivative. In some cases, it's just simply lack of talent out there. Now, in some ways, the reason may be, is lack of musicianship. Now, we have too many artists out there who are personalities than they are bands or artists. Steven Tyler became a personality instead of a member of Aerosmith. Cardi B, Nicki Minaj, Megan Thee Stallion. These are personalities. These are not musicians. To give an example, Kanye and Drake to me are personalities and not musicians, because they're too invested in their beef. They're too invested in drama outside of their craft, right? And there are other reasons why as well. And then if we talk about musicianship from another perspective, you have people creating music with a computer, with technology, but they can't play an instrument at all. So the music may be sterile. And so I posed a question out there. Can you call yourself a musician if you can't play a single musical instrument, whether it be brass, woodwind, percussion, keys, strings, whether guitar, mandolin, bass, you name it? And then another reason why we may not have legendary bands is because of the zombification of the masses. The cell phone, the social media. Again, like I said, the watching others do instead of doing yourself. No one truly listening. All right. So back to, are you really a musician if you can't play an instrument? keep in mind, I think the voice counts. The throat is an instrument. So if you just sing, I consider you a musician, if you have talent. Now, if you can't play an instrument, but you make music, you may argue that, yes, you are a musician, but you're not a high-tiered elite musician. You are a lower-tiered musician. Again, I'm not sure what to believe. Most days I want to argue that if you don't play an instrument, you're not a real musician. But I'm still kind of on the fence. Maybe the better argument would be, okay, you're a musician, but you're not a good one. You're not an elite musician because if you're using a computer, that kind of thing. Now, what needs to also be said is, let's see what page. Okay, so what also needs to be said is the education system that we have. This may be a reason why we have no more legendary bands. Now, I saw recently on YouTube, and I forget the video, where someone commented that self-taught musicians are better than educated musicians. And I'm going to push back on here. There are some wonderful self-taught musicians out there. But I've seen people post on Quora and Reddit, and when I look at all the bands that are my favorites, the ones that I'm obsessed with, and I did this a while back, and I can't find it because I want to do a video on this at some point, but I think, well, I know, most of the band, there are more, let me put it this way, there are more bands that I listen to who are British or who are from the United Kingdom than there are bands who are from America. Now, Rush is my favorite band, so they're Canadian, but if we leave them out for a minute, most of the bands that I listen to, if I were to say, here are 100 bands that are my favorite 100 bands, I think 80+% of them are from Britain or the United Kingdom and not America. That says something. And guess what, folks? Most of the bands that I like that are from England or the United Kingdom, they're educated. They went to school. Okay, so that argument is neither here or there. So, but I think, because I'm a teacher and I see it, students who care about learning every year gets worse and worse. And there are teachers who are just collecting a paycheck. And I've seen this at the previous 2 schools that I worked for. Thank God not at the current school I work at. Okay, thank goodness. And at these previous 2 schools, there was this dumbing down of the curriculum. There was a lack of rigor. Not everywhere, but in certain teachers, right? And then recently, 4 months ago, 5 months ago, maybe even 6 months ago, I saw an article about how Oregon is dumbing down their program because they think that teaching grammar and they believe that mandating that students pass their LEAP test or whatever the qualification test is called to graduate is racist. And I thought that's ridiculous. So you no longer have to be proficient, in Oregon at least, you no longer have to be proficient in English, social studies, and math to graduate. Do you want these people operating on you if you get ill? Okay. Do you want someone who made D's and F's and C minuses to operate on you? Do you want someone who made C's and D's and F's to be your electrician, to be your plumber, to be a fireman, to be a policeman, right? Okay. So from my experience as a teacher, as 2 previous schools that I worked at, you had teachers showing way too many movies. You had too many teachers letting their students be on cell phones and listening to music and that kind of thing. And this is part of the problem, the dumbing down of the education system. One year, the first school I ever worked at, 25 years ago, we had 2 teachers who would let their students watch, a playoff game if it was going on during the day. It's just ridiculous. All right, so another reason why there may be no legendary bands is because of AI. Sterility. There's no human heart. There's no soul. There's no spirit. There's no imperfection, which I find necessary. I'm going to get to that towards the end of the video. Now, Let me see my notes here. Yeah, this comes last. So AI is a problem. And so in Rick Beato's video, he's not sure, he's on the fence, but he says, can technology be innovative? He says, I don't think so. I really have to think about that. So he didn't really think it through. I think technology can be innovative. You have effects pedals, have come a long way. You have electronic drums. If bass can be electronic, why can't the drums be? Neil Peart did a great job on both analog and electronic drums. I prefer analog drums, but I prefer electric bass. Now, if we talk about technology, and specifically AI, let me go to a post that I made on Anthony Fantano's channel. And he's huge. He has a huge following. And let me see if I can find it here. I must have went the wrong way. Swiped the wrong way. Yes, I did. Just give me a second here, folks. So, not long after Rick Beato's 2 videos where he argued that music is getting worse, Fantano posted his video where he mostly disagrees with Rick Beato, and that Fantano is saying that current music is not worse, etc., etc. Then he contradicts himself and becomes a hypocrite in a video he posted after that. And in this video, he is rallying and ranting against AI used for album covers and art. So here's what I posted on as a response. So you are against the dehumanization of visual art, but you are okay with the dehumanization of music based on your video where you disagree with Rick Beato concerning quantizing music. Technology may help music be innovative, but it dehumanizes music because you've let the programs like Pro Tools and Auto-Tune, etc., be the middleman or go-between between the artist and the art itself, sucking or depleting the soul, spirit, and heart out of music. There is no beauty in art without the human element. That's my response. And I fully believe in that. So, I said that, let's see. I said that imperfection is necessary. So let me talk about that. I do believe imperfection is necessary because the essay by John Ruskin in his essay called Stones of Venice, he talks about this. So let me pull up the quote, which I pulled up my phone and took a photograph of. So here's why I'm, for the most part, anti-AI. I'm like, if you're familiar with the Dune novels, the ones written by his son and that he co-authored with someone else, there's an event in the Dune science fiction timeline called the Butlerian Jihad, and in this, originally Frank Herbert said that the Butlerian Jihad was just when people put aside their technology and stopped using them, but then his son, and the other author, whose name I forget, something J. Anderson, I think, changed it to an actual war between humans and machines. But so, and people have joked and said that we're in the AI apocalypse, maybe, but I digress. But here is what John Ruskin says. This is, I think, late 1800s. He says in his essay, The Stones of Venice, on why imperfection is necessary. And if you have AI, you don't have imperfection. Here we go. Here's the quote from John Ruskin for Stones of Venice. Imperfection is in some sort essential to all that we know of life. It is the sign of life in a mortal body, that is to say, of a state of progress and change. Nothing that lives is or can be rigidly perfect. Part of it is decaying, part nascent. And in all things that live, there are certain irregularities and deficiencies, which are not only signs of life, but sources of beauty. No human face is exactly the same in its lines on each side, no leaf perfect in its lobes, no branch in its symmetry. All admit irregularity as they imply change. And to banish imperfection is to destroy expression, to check exertion, to paralyze vitality. All things are literally better, lovelier, and more beloved for the imperfections which have been divinely appointed, that the law of human life may be effort, and the law of judgment mercy. Accept this then for a universal law, that no noble work of man can be good unless it is imperfect. And these words have stayed with me to this day. When I heard this in grad school, I was like blown away by that. So, what is my take? Are there no legendary bands post 1988? I'm on the fence about 9 Inch Nails, 1989, and I'm on the fence, like I said, about Nirvana. So let's, for argument's sake, say that Nirvana and 9 Inch Nails are both legendary bands. I'm close to saying and conceding they are. That I will argue and amend rather and Gene Simmons' thesis. I think that there are no legendary bands once we get into 1990. They don't fit any of the elements that I've... And again, please realize this is just one person's opinion, okay? I'm one person. I'm a drop in the bucket, okay? I'm not saying you have to agree with me, but from my perspective, from my experience, from my personality, from my tastes, I don't think there has been a legendary band since 1989. Overall, there's no comparison from going all the way back to the 1800s classical music through and including 1988. So if we start with the classical Baroque period through 1988, I don't think there's been any legendary... 1989, no legendary artists. Everything from 1990 onward, no legendary bands. Now, if we're going to have a return to greatness, a new musical artistic renaissance, because I believe right now we're living in an anti-renaissance. Here's why. Because we need a return of the human spirit. So if we're going to have a return to greatness and have legendary bands, we need a return of the human spirit. We need to embrace the imperfect, as Ruskin and even the Romantics have mentioned, Byron, Shelley, Keats, Coleridge, Wordsworth, and Blake, right? Especially Byron, Shelley, Keats, and Blake. We need an educational pursuit of music. We need real people. We need real instruments, not simulacra. Then maybe we'll have the next Hendrix, the next Jim Morrison, the next Janis Joplin, the next Jimmy Page, the next Ritchie Blackmore, the next Michael Hira, the next Duane Allman, the next Keith Jarrett, the next David Bowie, the next Miles Davis, the next Joni Mitchell, etc. Thanks for watching. Take care now.